Recently, a brand new emulator called AetherSX2 dropped onto the emulation scene, and from the early reports, it seemed really legit. So I spent the past week testing it out on 20 PS2 games, and I have so much information to share with you guys, from which games worked to which didn't, to what sort of processor you should need, to what settings to adjust, and the thing that surprised me the most, whether you should use the US region or PAL region ROM to improve performance. Just a quick reminder to check out my previous video which looked at the Poco F3 Snapdragon 870 mobile and where I tested the hardest to run Dreamcast, PSP and Gamecube games. That's the phone I'll be using to do all my testing in this video. And remember to also subscribe to the channel to get all my latest videos, as I'll be testing lots of PS2 titles on Android going forward. Before we dive into the game testing showcase, I want to just quickly go over the AetherSX2 app itself because it is brand new. The app is currently in open beta and is still very early on in development. Even though I'm only doing full testing in the last week or so, I've been using it for the past month casually for many PS2 games, and I have already noticed significant improvements in many games. So even though a game I'm showing now may not work or has poor performance, it could potentially be better later. The app is available on the Google App Store and it's pretty easy to get set up and running. You do need to supply your own BIOS file. This is the system BIOS from your own PS2. There are lots of guides on the internet and YouTube videos how to do that, so I don't want to have to repeat all of it, but the short summary would be you do need to run your own homebrew programs on the PS2, and there are ways for both hard and soft modded PS2s, and I'll leave links to that below. The soft mod way is as simple as burning a program on a DVD called FreeDVD Boot, downloading the BIOS dumper from the PCSX2 website, and then running that on the PS2 and dumping the BIOS files onto a USB drive. Once you have those files, copy them onto your Android device and point to them within AetherSX2. The AetherSX app itself is already pretty comprehensive in terms of system and graphics options. I have played around with the app a little, so let me give you a quick summary of the important options. I'm using the Vulkan backend for all the games in this video. Whenever I've had poor performance, I have tried to use OpenGL or software rendering, but it's usually worse than Vulkan. The option that makes the biggest difference to performance is the setting for PS2 CPU clock rates and CPU cycle skipping, and it's labeled EE here for Emotion Engine. The setting here allows you to over or underclock the PS2 CPU, so there may be instances where it will boost performance, and other times it doesn't help at all. As there's so many ARM chipsets out there, this is something everyone has to play around with themselves, and there's no golden rule to follow. The only thing I would say is that nothing really beats pure hardware processor performance. Sometimes though, underclocking or cycle skipping the PS2 can improve performance enough that the game is playable. There are also a variety of other graphical options here, but most of the time when I was searching for extra performance, they didn't improve performance that much. That said, if you want a different style of bilinear filter or anisotropic filter, you can adjust that here. You can also play around with increasing the resolution as well. Some games had graphical problems playing at higher resolutions, so I tested everything at 1x resolution. One last thing, I will be updating a Google spreadsheet of the games I've tested, which will be ongoing from now on, and I'll leave it in the description below, and of course I will upload longer gameplay videos on the second channel JimRPG too. I'm also once again using my performance rating scale, bad, okay, good, great. For bad, I wouldn't play it on this system. Okay is if it's your only option, good means it plays well with some issues, and great means it plays with little to no issues at all. Let's start with ATV Offroad Fury 2, and this was a game I'd been looking forward to for a long time, as it's a game packed with content, but unfortunately the game just doesn't work with a lot of emulation issues. Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance worked really great. Now, the game had the same sluggish slowdown the Gamecube version had for the first 20 minutes for me. However, I think that's because I had Disable Hardware Readbacks option turned off, but once I had that turned on, the game worked fine. There were still some sections of slowdown, but overall it works well. I know a lot of people like this one, and I'm pleased to say Burnout 3 works great with almost no issues. If you're wondering why in some games I don't have the music running, that's because there are copyright claims even on older music that can demonetize my videos.
Alright, Nichols, you're all ready for Jerry.
Call of Duty 3 doesn't work at all, and there's too many graphical issues and slowdown to play this. This is Champions of Norrath, and it's a good time to talk about the different region ROMs. I actually started using US region ROMs to begin with because I know most of my audience is in the US. However, it can be advantageous to pick the PAL European ROMs if the US ROM isn't working well for you. And that's because the US version runs at 60 FPS for older 60Hz NTSC displays, and the PAL version runs at 50 FPS for 50Hz PAL displays. This is possibly the one time where we can thank developers for making a slower frame rate version. With Champions of Norrath, the US version was dipping from 60 FPS to 45 FPS, so there were big frame drops which made it really jarring to play. However, the PAL version dipping from 50 FPS to 45 FPS, the dips weren't as bad and not nearly as noticeable. With a maximum cycle skip, I was able to maintain pretty playable speed. The 50 FPS limit also helped maintain smoother frame rates for longer, pretty much like how a 30 FPS limiter can smooth gameplay out. And using PAL ROMs is much needed even with a fairly strong processor like the Poco F3 with the Snapdragon 870, so I think if you're on a weaker processor, using PAL ROMs can go some way to getting a smooth experience. That being said, PAL ROMs aren't always better, and we'll get into this more in just a second.
36 right and 6 left.
Next up we have Colin McRae Rally 3, which actually suffered from the same issue as Champions of Norrath, where the US version had dips from 60 to 45 FPS and the PAL version had frame rates of 50 FPS to 45 FPS. The PAL version was a bit smoother, though in this case underclocking or using a cycle skip didn't really help at all.
And 4 right, keep in and the long 2 left.
It doesn't really matter anyway because you can just play Colin McRae Rally 4, which is the better game with a better championship mode. The PAL version of Colin 4 plays really great, so if you don't mind which rally game, play this one. Devil May Cry has some issues, one where the screen location renders incorrectly, and it looks like some text is missing as well. You could play this if you've memorized all the text in this game, but I think this is probably easily fixed sometime in the future, so I'd hold off on playing. The performance is pretty good generally speaking.
Old codger? I do hope you're not referring to me.
Dragon Quest VIII plays at a smooth 30 FPS. I'm probably still going to stick to my 3DS version for all the minor quality of life improvements, but this was a PS2 exclusive for a good while, so it's nice to see another way to play this. Dynasty Warriors 4 is an old favourite of mine, and if we have time I'd like to check out some of the others in the series. This plays really well in terms of performance, but also it's just a really fun game because Warriors games at its core haven't really changed that much. Final Fantasy XII runs great and runs at 30 FPS for the US version. I have also gone back and played the PAL version, which runs at 25 FPS, but I didn't capture any footage, so we'll talk more about this issue when we discuss Grand Theft Auto 3. If you decide to play Final Fantasy XII, play the US version instead of the PAL version if you can. For God of War, I only tested the PAL version and it runs great on the Snapdragon 870, and frame rates are really good. I saw this on a YouTube video about a month ago and it definitely did not look as good then, so I think there's been improvements made here. God of War 2 has similar performance, and the whole opening section, which has a lot of enemies including a constant boss encounter, runs really well. I'd be really interested to see how this runs on the Odin, which is a Snapdragon 845. It's kinda incredible to think that we have full speed God of War 1 and 2 on handheld, especially when the Vita versions were running at 30 FPS. Gran Turismo 4 was another game where I only tested the PAL version. I'll try the US version as well on the Odin, but for now I was just happy to see this game running perfectly with no issues on a handheld. Given the controversy over the recent GTA 3 re-release, I think this section should be interesting for many viewers. I tested both the US version and the PAL version and was kind of shocked by what I found, especially seeing as I bought the PAL version day one 20 years ago and didn't really think anything other than this was an amazing game. As you can see, the US version runs at 30 FPS while the PAL version runs at 25 FPS, and the difference is really noticeable while playing them one after another. The PAL version runs like it's missing frames, while the US version looks smooth in comparison. It's probably not going to show up even on a side-by-side comparison like this on YouTube, so if you have the time, test this one out yourself. This is a great example of when you can't always use the PAL version because the majority of the time the 30 FPS game is just way better. With Jak and Daxter, the PAL version running at 50 FPS was much smoother when compared against the 60 FPS US version that had lots of dips. Both versions also have graphical issues around the main character and the environment. Klonoa 2 was disappointing because the game seemed to work perfectly, however the emulator crashes easily back to the OS, so after 2 crashes I didn't test any further. Marvel Ultimate Alliance looks really good, but unfortunately the game is really choppy and slow. It seems fairly stable and you could play it like this, but you're probably better off playing another version.
Give me some cover fire in the bunker window. I can make a run for the signal.
Medal of Honor Frontline is yet another game just like Final Fantasy XII and GTA 3, where the PAL version is 25 FPS and the US version is 30 FPS. Now technically this game seems to have a frame limiter at either 60 or 30 FPS and seems to jump between the two to keep things smooth, but the US version is just better given much of the game is at 30 FPS. Finally, we have Metal Gear Solid 2, a game with graphics that still hold up to this day. And I'm pleased to say this game plays great on the Snapdragon 870. I only tried the PAL version, which played at a silky smooth 50 FPS, but I think the US version should play just as well. We're going to leave it here for the first part of testing for the PS2 emulator AetherSX2. In the next video, we'll continue testing more PS2 games, so make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.